Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lemon Dew. I'm Brie, and today's episode is going to be about PMS. So, before I begin, I just want to say, as always, thank you to everyone who has subscribed and listened to all of my episodes in my podcast. As always, I'm very grateful for all of the support, and it really helps me keep this podcast going. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, during my last period, I have experienced PMS, which is premenstrual syndrome. Now, of course, PMS obviously applies to women because every month women have their periods unless they're menopausal. So, in the case of PMS, this is where women experience a range of symptoms before their period takes place. So, the symptoms that are quite common include mood swings, feeling depressed or irritable, anxiousness, feeling upset or emotional, tiredness / having trouble sleeping, bloating, cramping, breast tenderness, headaches, spotty skin, greasy hair, changes in appetite, or food cravings. Now, it isn't said as to what causes PMS, but it's often linked to changes in hormone levels. And of course, this affects some women more than others. Now, coming from personal experience as a woman, obviously, I will say that having my period coincides with depression. So, as most of you are probably aware, I do suffer with clinical depression, and obviously, this isn't something that I can control. It's something that I have to manage by taking baby steps every single day. Of course, there are some days where I don't feel depressed, and there are other days which I do, either because of triggers in my personal life or for no reason. But again, I just have to manage by taking things one step at a time. Now, when it comes to PMS and depression, in my case, I find that I tend to get very irritable and moody. And during the stages before my last period took place, I was having experiences where I felt really low. So I was crying quite often, and for me, I don't really like the idea of being emotional. And as I've mentioned a few episodes back, the reason I don't like being emotional is because this is often seen as a sign of weakness. And considering that I'm a sensitive person who also has autism, I have to try to maintain my emotions by keeping them bottled up, especially in certain scenarios, i.e., at work, because I work as a receptionist and have to try to maintain some sort of professionalism and composure. Because if I'm talking to clients, I don't want them to see me cry. I don't want them to notice the change in my tone of voice. Hence why I just shove things down and try to bury myself in my work. So, going back to the topic of PMS, as per mentioned, I have days where I do feel quite low, and this is often to a point where I don't really want to do anything. And in general, when I do feel depressed, the only thing I want to do is curl myself in my bed and make sure that nobody notices me. And this way, it's easier for me to not only hide my emotions, but to hide myself from the outside world. Either that, or I have instances where I have ruminations over self harm or suicide. And although I don't act on these feelings per se, I do have instances where it's possible that I can act on them. And I guess this comes from personal experience in a sense, because in secondary school, I did turn to self harm at one point, and I did turn to suicide at one point as well. And of course, it's something I don't really discuss much because it's in the past, and also because it just sort of brings back memories where I was going through a huge amount of personal issues that I don't really want to discuss here. Also, during the stages of my period, whether it's before or during, I do get very moody. I have days where I don't really want to talk to people, or if people talk to me, ask me questions, I just want to tell them to fuck off and leave me alone. And I guess being left alone helps me because I can process my feelings and nobody will come under my wrath, if that makes sense. On certain days during my period, my appetite increases quite a lot. I do tend to get cravings, mainly spicy food, because I am a person who loves spice. And for people who know me very well, they are probably aware that I use Scotch bonnet in my cooking on a regular basis, especially if I'm making my own version of curry like chicken madras, which is a meal I had today with some salad, or even some Chinese food like stir fries or fried rice, which I can make very well at home. In the case of spices, aside from Scotch bonnet, I also tend to have cravings for spicy pizza. So, for example, today, despite not being on my period, I had jalapeno peppers and chili oil in a pizza that I had at Pizza Express. Either that or I crave ramen. And the main brand of ramen I do crave on my period is Nongshim instant ramen. So you have it in a packet and a cup form, and you have a red version and a black version. And depending on what I'm craving, I normally opt for the black version, which is 10 times spicier, and I don't know why. It just is something that I feel like eating. And spicy food, personally, when I'm on my period, is a comfort food. And other comfort foods that I really like mainly include sweet things like chocolate. So I tend to opt for waffles or waffles with fruit or some sort of fruit in general. But again, it mostly depends on how I feel during the day. Now, I guess with PMS, it can be very difficult to navigate at times because if you're a woman going through the stages of your period, your mood and overall habits tend to fluctuate, and this can often affect your day, which can come across as a huge problem. Now, usually, when it comes to managing symptoms, the main things that are recommended, including reducing caffeine or alcohol, as well as salt in terms of food. And for me personally, it can be a bit difficult to reduce caffeine because normally when I'm at work and I'm on a lunch break, I do drink cappuccinos quite regularly because it gives me an energy boost, especially if the second half of my shift is slow. And also, I do like to have a glass of wine every now and then, and it's kind of a Friday tradition at home when my mum and I come home from work. And there's nothing wrong with having a glass or two. I mean, as long as you don't have a hangover, which I don't, because personally I would not want to experience such a thing, then it's absolutely fine. In the case of salt, I have actually reduced salt in my cooking. So the only instance where I normally put salt in my food nowadays is if I'm making a salad or making oven fries. But otherwise, I don't really salt my food very often because I use other seasonings, and if I'm using something like soy sauce in particular, it kills the flavor if I put in excess salt. Another thing that helps with PMS is also reducing stress. So, this can be done through relaxation or recreational activities like walking. And recording your period helps, especially if you experience fluctuating emotions. So, for example, I use a journal as well as an app called Dailyo, which is a mental health app, to record my habits when it comes to my period. With Dailyo and journals, I use them in general to record mental health and overall habits in terms of where I'm at, who I'm with, what I'm doing, etc. And I also use Samsung Health to record my period. And beforehand, there was a period tracking app I used called Flow, but I just decided to stick with Samsung Health because it's built in and it doesn't make sense for me to have two separate apps that can do similar things. But if I really want to have a detailed entry of my PMS or my overall period, then I resort to journaling or using Dailyo. And of course, this helps in terms of observing any mood changes, symptoms, etc. But the most important thing is also to make sure you get regular sleep and exercise. And of course, you can do meditation and yoga and eat healthy meals. So, eating fruit and vegetables, drinking a lot of water, which is something I tend to do when experiencing PMS, also helps because of hydration. So, of course, it's been 10 minutes now since I have spoken, and this is going to be the end of today's episode. So, I wish I mentioned this in the beginning, but today's episode is kind of a short one because it goes into detail a bit about PMS, which mostly applies to women, obviously, because women have periods, men don't. But of course, if you're a woman who experiences PMS and you have mental health needs and such, then I really hope today's episode was of a big help. So, next week, as I will be continuing the 2 week schedule from the 22nd of September, I'm going to be sharing more about why I hate my skin colour and my culture. Now, of course, the next episode is going to lean into some controversial opinions and controversial topics, but this is something that I have wanted to discuss for a while because lately I've been doing quite a lot of self reflection, not just in terms of my life, but how I feel about certain things, such as being an autistic person, being somebody who has clinical depression, and of course, being Black, as sadly, being a Black woman with autism and clinical depression, at least from most of my personal experience, has disadvantages. So, of course, if you do disagree with any opinions that I will be mentioning in this particular episode, which will be released soon, then that's okay because there is something called freedom of speech, and everyone has the right to say how they feel about any topic. And for me personally, I'm an open minded person who is open to hearing different opinions from people, even if there are things I don't really agree with, because that is the whole point of freedom of expression, really. So, yes, that will be the next episode. But of course, even though I am going to be sharing some controversial opinions about my skin color and culture, I do want to talk about my concerns, in a sense, with the Black community, especially in terms of how we are just playing ourselves in a sense. And what I mean by this is, if you look at mainstream media, especially reality TV shows, you kind of notice that Black individuals are portrayed as caricatures or stereotypes. And this paints the whole community in a bad light. And of course, that's something I'm going to discuss a little bit more. But of course, I am going to be sharing some of my experiences in relation to autism and clinical depression, most of which I've somewhat alluded to because I did explain a bit in terms of how disabilities and mental health in general are often ignored within the Black community because of this whole window of denial. So it's almost as if, Black families do not accept these things and they just want to basically get rid of the problem by putting you in an institution or something, which I think is horrible. But of course, as always, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, And I also hope you have a wonderful Sunday and enjoy the rest of your weekend because, of course, the next day is back to the grind as usual. But until the 22nd of September, I will see you for the next episode of Lemon Dew. Bye for now.